Welcome to What You Don't Know You Don't Know, the podcast that dives headfirst into the surprising, the overlooked, and the misunderstood. Hosted by a curious duo and one man, one woman, we explore the world's most fascinating ideas hiding in plain sight. From science and religion to politics, psychology, history, and everything in between, we shine a light on the knowledge that's publicly available but rarely discussed. Each episode is a deep but never dull conversation that challenges assumptions, sparks new perspectives, and reveals just how much more there is to know, especially about the things you didn't even know you were missing. Whether you're a skeptic, a seeker, or just someone who loves good conversation, this show will leave you thinking, questioning, and most importantly, knowing.
Today, we're really plunging into a question that sits right at the very core of what it means to be human, doesn't it?
It really does. How we find purpose, how we treat each other, it's fundamental.
Yeah, the basis for how we interact. And it feels, especially relevant now with all the shifts in belief we see.
Absolutely. Where do values come from, if not, say, tradition or divine command? It's a live question.
Exactly. And you've brought some really thought-provoking sources for us. There's this essay, What If This Is It? Powerful title.
Right. It tackles that idea head on. Life without an afterlife.
Well, we also have a critical look at secular humanism and some insights into how humanists in the UK actually relate to Christianity.
So yeah, we've got the philosophy of finitude, a specific non-religious stance, and then views on how that stance is critiqued and how it interacts with, well, a major religious tradition.
So our mission today is to unpack all this, understand secular humanism as it's presented here, see how it stacks up against religious views, especially Christian ones in these texts, and, explore what it all means for how we live now.
It's digging into some foundational beliefs, definitely. These sources offer distinct, sometimes really clashing perspectives. Should be interesting.
Okay, let's unpack this then, diving into these sources to see what nuggets of knowledge and insight they hold for you.
Where should we start? Maybe defining secular humanism.
Good idea. We need to get a handle on what that term actually means, according to these materials you share.
Okay, so the sources explain that the term secular humanism, it kind of emerged as a label for people who were rejecting supernatural beliefs.
Right, defining a non-religious stance.
But it's more than just non-religious. It's presented as a positive affirmation of human potential, human responsibility.
And it has history, right? It didn't just appear yesterday.
No, not at all. The underlying ideas, they trace back to Enlightenment thinking, putting human concerns, human reason front and center.
Instead of relying on revelation or religious texts.
Exactly. Using rational methods, scientific methods to understand the world and figure out ethics, morality.
So human reason is the main guide. And a key concept seems to be naturalism.
Absolutely central. Naturalism, as these sources describe it, is basically the belief that the physical world, the natural world, is all there is.
That's it. No spiritual realm, no divine plan.
Pretty much. One source quotes Carl Sagan, the universe is all that is or ever was or ever will be. That sums up that boundary.
Okay, so if that's the case, if there's no external divine source, where does meaning come from? Where does value come from?
Well, from this viewpoint, meaning and value, they aren't sort of found out there or given by a higher power. They're created, developed by humans.
We make our own meaning.
We're the source of purpose, yes.
Now, one of the sources offers a critique, defining this whole worldview as based on, let's see, atheism, naturalism, evolution, and ethical relativism. And it argues it's an attempt to have a civilized society without God and what that source calls his moral principles.
Yeah, that critique really draws a sharp line, doesn't it, between the theistic and the humanist view.
But you mentioned older roots, too, like before the Enlightenment.
Right. The focus on human flourishing isn't entirely new. You had ancient Greek thinkers, the Stoics, the Epicureans, focusing on living well in this life, and Confucianism in China, looking to human relationships and ethics for order, not gods.
So a long history of prioritizing human agency, and the humanist manifestos are mentioned.
Yes, they're presented as documents that articulate these core ideas. Things like rejecting God as the cause of the universe, being critical of traditional religions for maybe prioritizing revelation over human needs.
And arguing there just isn't enough evidence for supernatural beliefs.
Correct. And because they're naturalists, logically there's no spiritual dimension, no afterlife.
Which connects to how they view origins, I suppose.
Directly. If there's no creator God, then life, including us, human life, is seen as purely a product of natural processes, evolution specifically.
Julian Huxley is quoted saying, "Man's body, mind, soul, all products of evolution, not supernatural creation."
Exactly. So evolution isn't just like a scientific theory for them. It's part of the fundamental story of where we come from.
And generally, the sources suggest secular humanists tend to see religion as, well, superstitious, maybe holding back progress.
That critical view of traditional religion definitely comes through in these materials, yes.
This leads us perfectly into that essay, What If This Is It? This is where the rubber meets the road, isn't it?
It really is. Asking that ultimate question, what if this life, this finite existence, is literally all there is? No heaven, no hell, just this.
Wow. That changes the perspective on everything, surely.
Profoundly. If there's no afterlife, then morality, your motivation for being good, it can't be about, divine judgment or getting into heaven.
So where does it come from?
It has to be grounded here. In human needs, in shared well-being, our mutual vulnerability, right here on Earth.
So ethics becomes about maximizing well-being, minimizing suffering for this life.
Precisely. And the essay presents secular humanism as the kind of natural framework for that view. If there's no external source of meaning or justice, well, then humans have to create it.
We build our own justice, our own sense of beauty, our own meaning.
We have to. And the essay points to examples like Scandinavian countries, highly secular societies, right? But they report high happiness, low crime, strong social trust.
As evidence, maybe, that you don't need religion for a good society.
It challenges that assumption. Yeah. And the essay stresses a really critical point about justice. If there's no divine judgment day coming,
then you have to sort it out now.
Exactly. Justice must be pursued, achieved, right here, right now. There's no cosmic court to fix things later.
That puts a lot of pressure on us, an urgency.
It does. It compels action, challenging injustice, reforming systems, helping people who are suffering in real time. The burden is entirely human.
And the essay suggests, maybe paradoxically, that knowing life is finite, knowing everyone suffers, everyone dies, that shared vulnerability, that can actually be a moral motivator.
Yes, a motivator for compassion, because we're all in this together, this one life.
And it makes life more precious, not less, because it's fleeting.
That's the argument. Impermanence makes love, beauty, experience incredibly valuable, because it won't last forever.
Yeah.
It quotes Mary Oliver's, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
In this context, that quote has enormous weight.
It really lands differently, doesn't it?
Very.
Scarcity creates value. The essay also suggests this view makes it harder to justify oppression using, divine will or promises of future rewards.
It encourages challenging dogma, pushing for fairness based on human dignity now.
Right. And if there's no escape plan to heaven, then Earth itself becomes, uniquely important, sacred even.
So environmental ethics become crucial. Taking care of the planet is our responsibility. There's no plan B.
We have to take responsibility for the future here. The essay also suggests seeing ourselves as essentially intelligent animals trying to navigate a complex world can foster a kind of humility, an awareness of how much we depend on each other.
It sounds empowering, but does the essay acknowledge the downsides, the difficulties?
Oh, definitely. It doesn't sugarcoat it. It says there are no easy answers, no cosmic comfort when you're suffering or facing loss. Death can feel, more final, more brutal.
Existential dread seems like a real possibility.
It is. Facing ultimate meaninglessness is tough unless you actively create meaning yourself.
But alongside that, there's freedom.
Existential freedom, yes. The freedom and the really heavy responsibility to build meaning from our own choices, our actions, love, courage, creativity, connection, not from divine rules.
And it asks which view actually benefits humanity more. Suggesting this focus on this life, on our responsibility now, that's what really demands moral action, sustainability, equality.
And replacing fear-based obedience with empathy.
It paints this picture, doesn't it? A world where kindness matters for its own sake, helping others is just what humans do. Art and science are expressions of our own wonder. People are free to believe, but not forced. And death is faced with courage and love based on the life lived.
It's a powerful vision, finding the sacred in the human, in the temporal.
Okay, so now let's contrast this with the religious viewpoints, mainly Christianity, as they appear in these sources. One source notes that historically, say in America from 1870 to 1930, the dominant worldview was basically Christian.
Right. And the critique will get to later positions secular humanism as the thing that essentially replaced that Christian framework.
And from that Christian perspective, as described here, God isn't just real, he's the ultimate source of everything. The universe, reality, meaning, ethics. Humans are not the measure of all things.
That's the fundamental difference, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Morality comes from outside humanity, from God, not just from human experience or figuring things out ourselves.
It's a foundational divergence. And the sources do acknowledge that religious frameworks like Christianity offer things like ritual, community, hope, ways of finding meaning, especially when dealing with grief or trauma.
Yes, they provide structures for those deep human needs.
The sources also look at how secular humanists in the UK engage with Christianity. It sounds complex, sometimes critical, sometimes acknowledging.
It's not always a clean break. Some humanists described want to keep what they see as the valuable human aspects while rejecting the theology.
Like the example of the British Humanist Association conducting non-religious ceremonies. Funerals, weddings, naming ceremony.
Exactly, trying to reclaim ritual as something fundamentally human, not exclusively religious, meeting those needs for ceremony and marking life events in a secular way.
And there are people who came from Christian backgrounds, now humanists, who still appreciate, say, singing hymns for the music or the historical value of church building.
Yeah, it shows how culture and personal history get layered. People pick and choose, engage selectively.
But then on the other side, there are religious critics who see humanism as basically just another religion in all but name, or even calling humanists atheist fundamentalists.
Right, implying a similar kind of certainty or dogma, just focused differently.
And the anthropology text mentions that for many Christians, their faith isn't just a culture among others, it's considered a universal truth, which obviously creates tension with academic approaches that analyze it as a cultural system.
That highlights the gap between an insider faith perspective and an external analysis.
Though one source does note that even some humanists admit religious people aren't, totally irrational in daily life. They accept science, use medicine, drive cars.
Suggesting maybe there's some shared ground in basic reasoning, even if the ultimate beliefs are poles apart. A bit of nuance there.
Okay, but now we have to look at this significant critique of secular humanism that's in the source material.
Yes, this particular source presents a very strong counter-argument. It argues that secular humanism actually leads to negative, even self-destructive outcomes for society.
That's quite a claim.
It suggests that while it promotes reason, it also somehow fosters irrationalism and contributes to moral decline. The source argues it should be rejected to avoid further societal problems.
How does it make that case? One point seems to be that humanism isn't neutral. It's an ideology with its own agenda, just like religions.
Exactly, positioning it as another ism. And a major criticism focuses on what it sees as a contradiction. How can humanism advocate for, say, common moral decency, but also promote situational ethics, where right and wrong depend on the context?
The source argues for universal moral principles, independent of situations.
Right. The critique also raises serious concerns about human sexuality. It argues that without external moral laws, focusing on autonomy could, in this source's interpretation, lead to unrestricted sexual freedom.
Which it frames negatively.
Yes, it frames it as reducing humans to animals. And it gives examples like gay and lesbian relationships and even bestiality as the source's interpretation of where a focus on individual sexual preferences without divine rules might lead. It explicitly links this to societal crisis. We need to be clear, this is the source's interpretation and chain of argument.
Understood. And abortion is another key point of criticism.
Yes, highlighted as a major contradiction to humanism's stated affirmation of life. The source views abortion as terminating human life and undermining the common good, particularly by neglecting the unborn.
Support for suicide is also criticized.
Deemed unacceptable by the critique. It argues human life has value beyond just the here and now, and suicide ignores the person's social connections and impact.
And euthanasia, too, if the intent is death.
Same line of reasoning from the critique, yes.
What about the idea that people are more important than rules, like the 10 Commandments?
The critique sees that as dangerous. It warns it could lead back to a state of nature, kind of a free-for-all, survival of the fittest. It insists laws and moral codes are absolutely necessary for order, harmony, protecting dignity.
Rules provide the essential structure in this view. The critique also suggests humanism puts too much faith in human reason.
Yes, overconfidence in reason alone, potentially ignoring what the source sees as a deeper human essence, which connects to the supernatural. reducing humans to just complex animals.
And the critique then lists several negative implications it draws from humanism's core beliefs.
It does. It argues. If you claim God doesn't exist, you imply believers are irrational.
Okay.
If you believe the universe is just chance, it implies there's no real basis for knowledge or science, because everything's fundamentally random.
If humans are the measure of all things, does that mean everyone just makes up their own reality, leading to chaos?
That's the implication drawn by the critique, yes. A breakdown of shared understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're just products of evolution, purely naturalistic, the critique argues we have no inherent value beyond being complex machines or animals.
So in a chance universe, life itself becomes meaningless, just atoms bumping around.
That's the conclusion the critique reaches from those premises. And crucially, if there's no higher power setting, absolute right and wrong,
Then there's no real ethics, no objective morality, people just do whatever.
potentially living without considering consequences beyond immediate self-interest or social pressure is the argument. The critique also challenges evolution itself,
How so?
questioning where the initial stuff, matter and energy came from in the first place, questioning if random chance is statistically plausible to explain the complexity of life, arguing it lacks a mechanism for consistent progressive change.
So challenging both the philosophy and the science it relies on. And it argues humanism can't provide a solid basis for human rights without an absolute standard.
Calling talk of rights within humanism pure surface illusion, because there's no external guarantor.
And it points out a potential internal contradiction.
A big one. How can humans be truly free and responsible if we are just biological organisms determined by natural processes? If we're purely products of evolution, the critique suggests we're sort of beyond freedom and dignity, our actions determined, not freely chosen.
That's a deep philosophical challenge to free will within naturalism.
It is. And the critique concludes that humanism leads to subjective morals, do what feels right, which it sees as dangerous for democracy, potentially leading to authoritarianism if right aren't grounded, absolutely.
And finally, it argues humanism makes the Christian message, the gospel, basically unintelligible by denying God, miracles, and the need for salvation.
It's a thorough rejection rooted in a completely different worldview.
Okay, so we've got this compelling vision from what if this is it, the humanist framework, and then this very stark religious critique. Where does that leave us? What do we make of all this?
Well, it certainly throws that fundamental tension into sharp relief, doesn't it? How do we build meaning? How do we ground morality?
The what if this is it essay itself kind of hints at a path, maybe, combining realism about being finite with deep compassion for each other in this life.
Finding value, profound value, in the here and now. Maybe allowing for experiences of depth or awe, what some might call spiritual, but critically, without needing authoritarian dogma or belief in the supernatural.
And that anthropology source, showing how even humanists often seek things like community, ritual, belonging, things religion historically provided.
It raises that big question. How do societies meet those fundamental human needs outside of traditional religious structures? Is it possible? Is it happening?
Can you pick and choose? Like that humanist enjoying church architecture or music, but not the theology. Can cultural forms hold meanings separate from their original religious roots?
It complicates the idea of a simple rejection of the past. And it makes you think about that difference between what a humanist might call stupidity, belief without evidence, and what a religious person calls faith. Are they just different words for different ways of knowing, or fundamentally opposed?
Ultimately, it seems these sources push us back to that core challenge. How do we build a good society, just, compassionate, meaningful, when we have such fundamentally different answers to the biggest questions about life, death, the universe?
Are these worldviews just incompatible? Or is there overlap, common ground we can build on, despite the differences? These sources really lay out the depth of the disagreements and how much feels at stake.
Wow. That was definitely a deep dive. Some incredibly complex, challenging ideas about living a good life, where values come from, the kind of world we want.
Yeah, we covered a lot. The humanist vision, that powerful what if this is it perspective, and then the strong critiques and contrasting religious views from the sources.
That tension is really clear, isn't it? Finding meaning just within the human sphere versus grounding it in something supernatural, it's profound.
And these sources highlight that call to action now, the search for community, but also those fundamental disagreements on everything from cosmology to ethics to human rights.
Definitely leaves us with a lot to chew on. What stands out most to you listening to this? How do these clashing ideas maybe shape how you think about responsibility or compassion or or the value of this one wild and precious life, as the essay put it.
Something significant to ponder as you go about your day.
Until the next deep dive.
Well, that's a wrap. Hope you liked the episode. Don't miss out on new episodes of You Don't Know, You Don't Know. New episodes every week. Like and subscribe.